What is going on, gunfighters? This is a requested episode. Got a passionate patron, at least one of them. They said 5/7 is coming up. The day 5/7, May 7th. You should do an episode on the 5/7. Okay. I'm here to serve. I don't do this podcast to serve me. I do it to serve you guys. Somebody really wants to know about the 5/7. Let me drop some knowledge bombs on you on the 5/7. We're going to talk about the 5/7, the cartridge, like the old Better Know a Cartridge episodes I used to do if you've been around long enough for those. Then let's get into a little bit of 5/7 philosophy. Let's get deep. Let's get Aristotle on the 5/7. So, gird your loins, saddle up, get ready for another episode of Gunfighter Life, where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I'm going to throw in a quick rapid-fire bio. I'm talking quick, fire and forget kind of mission on the bio, and then we'll get into the main topic. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review. Blessed to have served in the military, law enforcement, combat veteran, private contractor, competition shooter, lifelong hunter, guide. Blessed by God that He got me through all those things so I could share this firsthand training, knowledge, experience with you to serve you today. Let's dive into the podcast. Now, the 5/7 is a really unique cartridge. It's unlike almost anything else really. The closest approximation would be the 4.6, which is an even more obscure cartridge, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to compare it to it. It is not really a rifle cartridge. It's certainly not a full-powered rifle cartridge. I would not even consider it an intermediate rifle cartridge. Not really a rifle cartridge, although it's chambered in rifles and carbines. It's not really a pistol cartridge, even though it's chambered in handguns. It's its own thing. It's a P.D.W. cartridge, which is pretty unique. There are a few others, but really, it's kind of in its own special league. So be wary when you see it compared to other things. You'll most commonly see it compared to .22 Magnum. Why? Because it's .22 caliber and it's quasi-similar in ballistics, but that's not the whole story. 5/7 is a bottlenecked cartridge. It's a center fire, so it's more reliable. Even if you had 100% reliable ignition on a .22 Magnum, they generally don't have a good reputation for feeding really well. .22 Magnum, that is, in semi-autos. Now, there are a lot of semi-autos in .22 Magnum, but they're not known for being reliable. It's a long, really skinny, straight-walled case that has some feeding issues. It again has the disadvantage of being a rimfire. I don't think it's a fair comparison. I don't want you to fall into the just as good fallacy thinking, oh, I've got my Kel-Tec PMR 30. And I like a lot of stuff Kel-Tec does. And if you want a PMR 30 for a fun gun, rock on. But don't think if you get a Kel-Tec PMR 30, oh, it's just as good as an FN 5.7 handgun. It's not. It's not. You have to deal with the rim. You have to deal with that long, skinny, very thin-walled cartridge, which can cause issues, feeding issues, and the rimfire ignition system itself issues, and bullet construction issues. So it's more than just numbers on a page. Numbers on a page and foot-pounds are only part of the story, so don't fall into that fallacy. Now, bullet construction itself, 5.7 bullets are constructed generally like or more akin to regular rifle, carbine, intermediate cartridge type bullets. Whereas .22 Magnums in general are constructed like .22 rimfire ammunition with lead with a thin copper wash, copper coating, not even a legit copper jacket for the most part. So you're not comparing apples to apples or apples to oranges. You're comparing like kiwis to kumquats. They're I guess both fruits, but that's about it. Also, just like don't think your .22 Magnum semi-auto is as good as a 5.7, also don't think that your 5.7 is a .223, thinking, oh, it's basically just as good as a .223. It is not. .223 is a proper intermediate rifle cartridge. And again, the 5.7 is not that. The 5.7 is its own thing. It was developed. I'm getting to what I think that I know. Could be wrong. By the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter is established. That's straight up God's law. Go ahead and do your own research on that and on what I'm telling you. But I believe it came out of the 90s P.D.W. trials. Much like the great success we had in days of yore with the M1 carbine, which if they're still reliable so much later now than when they were produced, and you can get a good reliable magazine, that's a really good P.D.W. weapon. I would consider that like our first real P.D.W. It wasn't a handgun. And you know, the Germans had like their Snellfoil stocked Luger. You think of those as kind of early P.D.W.s. Well, in the 90s, they decided they wanted to hold trials for a brand new P.D.W. and it had some requirements, but this came out of that. This and the 4.6. Now, for a long time, it was basically just FN. They had the FN P90, PS90, which are really cool, innovative, and still futuristic today. Really cool and good guns. But they're meant to be in full auto. And I think you lose a lot when... I'm generally not a big fan of full auto and shoulder fire weapons. I've had the pleasure of shooting more full auto than I care to remember. A lot of full auto stuff. Generally, I consider full auto almost useless in a shoulder-fired gun, but not with these kind of cartridges. They are actually one of the few things that are controllable in a shoulder-fired weapon. That's what they were designed for, and I think you lose a lot when you go to semi-auto with these. Not that there's never a case for them, but they were designed to be full auto. Right? The FN P90 has a 50-round magazine. Standard. It's a cool weapon. It's a good weapon. And they made the 5.7 handgun because they figured if you're going to have a P.D.W. chambered in it, you might as well have a handgun chambered in it. And for a long time now, there was a few like niche AR uppers made in it, but for a long time that was basically it. And then it's much like the 10mm, it's seen a resurgence. There's a lot of guns chambered in it, of varying qualities, of varying reputation, of varying reliability and quality control standards. But it's seen a resurgence. Now let's get into a little bit of the actual ballistics of this round. No, I don't have any sponsors on the show. I turn down sponsors. I would never take a gun kind of company ammunition sponsor. But for defensive ammunition, no pun intended, the gold standard, one of the gold standards for a long time has been Spear Gold Dots. There's a lot of other good ones too. You know, Winchester Ranger, Federal HST, even Remington Golden Saber. But, and don't get mad if I didn't mention yours. But Spear Gold Dot is a trusted name in defensive ammunition. So let's start there with the 5.7. Let's look at what the numbers are. To give credit where it's due, they're not a sponsor either, but I'm looking at Midway to kind of see what they have in stock. What's common ammo? 40 grains at 1,800 feet per second. Now, again, it plays by its own rules. This is vastly different if we consider, and this is not exact. I'm rounding numbers to give you a plain vanilla load for a 9mm. 115 grain at 1,100, 1,200 feet a second. Pretty vanilla load. But you're talking 100, and that's on the light side. That's 115 grains. We're talking 40 grains here at 1,800 feet a second. Muzzle energy, and don't read too much into muzzle energy. That's just numbers on a page. That's not the whole story. It's part of the story. And force equals mass times velocity squared. So there's your physics. So in general, the numbers tend to favor light, fast bullets. But even so, this 40 grains at 1,800 is giving us, if their math is correct, I'm not double checking it, I'm assuming theirs is, it's their data, 288 foot-pounds. A hot 9mm is right around 400, a little over 400 foot-pounds of energy. This is giving you 288. 9mm is the de facto standard handgun round of our time, and I'm a fan of the 9mm. I think it's a standard for a reason. However, it's not known for being a powerhouse in and of itself. And you're talking about going from right around closer to 400 foot-pounds to 288. All right, let's see what else. Let's see what other loads we got for the 5.7. Federal American Eagle. I'd call that a pretty vanilla, usually, load. This lists a 40 grain at 1655 feet per second for 243 foot-pounds. A little bit softer, but that's to be expected. This is what I consider a practice load, and the Spear Gold Dot is a defensive load. Let's mix it up and get something different than the 40 grain. We got a Fiocchi, which Fiocchi makes some good ammo. And I'm not just saying that because I'm Italian. Italian-American. Let us look here. We have a 35 grain at 1750 for 238. Pretty similar numbers. Ooh, I wasn't even aware of this one. It's picking up some steam again. It's seeing a resurgence. There's a Hornady Critical Defense 40 grain FTX. Little clown nose bullet. If you're familiar with the Hornady defensive rounds, a little red polymer, elastic, whatever proprietary blend of squishiness they have in their hollow point there. Well, let's see what these got for numbers. 40 grains. And it doesn't list the velocity, but somebody in the comments thankfully said the Hornady website, and again, double check this, said that the velocity was 1810 feet per second. That's pretty hot. That's going to be up there with the first one we looked at, which makes sense because it's a defensive load. Now let's steer this car in another direction. Let's look at cost. Let's go to AmmoSeek. Again, not a sponsor, just AmmoSeek, if you don't know, is a good resource. It's kind of like Expedia or Travelocity for ammo. It searches the intranet for good deals on ammo, what's in stock. Let's look at the old 5.7. Well, not bad. 38.9 cents. And this is at the time of this recording. These numbers could change by the minute. But at the time of this recording, and this is in the year of our Lord 2024, the second day of May, at 9:39 p.m. I'm kind of a night owl by nature. 38.9 cents for some good 5.7 ammo. That's the cheapest, and it's good. That actually surprises me. Again, it's seen a resurgence. It's come down quite a bit in price. Same search. 9mm, 14.5 cents. And another one at 14.5 cents and 14.9 cents is the next cheapest one per round, which is roughly half. So there's that. And if we look at 5.56 NATO, 38.0 cents a round, 39.8 cents a round. There's something to be said for economy of scale. You know, 5.7 has come, it's a lot less niche than it used to be as far as ammo production and manufacture. Now let's look up Wikipedia. Wikipedia is certainly not a sponsor. Let us look and see what the old wiki has to say, shall we, on the 5.7x28. Maybe something I missed or forgot or got wrong. This is from Wikipedia. I like to give credit where it's due. The FN 5.7x28, designed as the 5.7x28 by the CIP, and FN 5.7x28 NATO is a small caliber, high velocity, smokeless powder, rebaited, bottlenecked center fire cartridge designed for pistols and personal defense weapons, P.D.W. uses, manufactured by FN Herstal. It is similar in length to the 22 WHMR and 22 Hornet. Unlike many new cartridges, it has no parent case. The complete package was developed from scratch by FN. And it lists some other load data for a 10.5-inch barrel and for a 16-inch barrel. So the ones we looked at heretofore, I believe, were pistol ballistics. Obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, for practical purposes, generally, got to throw those caveats in there. But practical purpose, generally, when you make a barrel longer, it burns more of the powder, which generally gives you greater velocity, to a point. And again, for most practical things. This lists a 23 grain flying at 2,800 feet a second. Dude, that's pretty nasty. A 31 at 2350 and a 27 at 2550 feet per second. Also gives us, and those were the 10 point something inch barrels, 10.4. And the last two it says are for the 16 inch barrel. It gives us a 40 grain at 2351 and a 28 at over 3,000 feet a second. Now those velocities are similar to 5.56 and a carbine, but it's not apples to apples because those velocities will generally be for a 55 to 60 grain bullet. And we're talking 20-something grain, 30-something grain, 40 grain. So it's not apples to apples. So be wary of the just as good as fallacy. Now, as I mentioned in the preamble to this episode, let's get into some philosophy. I don't consider this a mainstream cartridge. I don't consider it a mainstream choice for defense. I consider it a niche weapon. I consider it good in its niches. Is niches the plural for niche? Niche? Niches? Is it like mice? Is it niche? No, I'm just kidding. Niches. So, what are the niches for the 5.7? Well, the one it was designed for, primarily, a P.D.W. Really good in a P.D.W. full auto. Now, I don't think there's any transferable for civilian 5.7 full autos because that came in after the ban. So, sad face there. But, in that, guys, it's pretty cool. Even in semi-auto in a P.D.W., it's not a full auto, right? But it is something. And it's still an option. Where does it shine? P.D.W.-wise. You start chopping, because you get so much more powder in a 5.56 223, you start chopping off barrels and get to a certain point, and you start bleeding velocity like a stuck pig. The 5.7 was designed initially for a PDW type gun. So if you're talking about really uber short PDWs, there's still some merit there for the 5.7. Also, if you're getting one of the ones that runs not the ones that run the pistol mags, but the ones that run the legit PDW magazines, the 50 round mags, which are kind of cool because they spin the bullet sideways, which that's just cool. I mean, if you're looking for a cool factor to scare your enemies away, if that's a thing, but it's not. But it is pretty cool. And those magazines, 50 rounds on tap. That's something to consider. So in the PDW guys, right, that's, I think, the primary niche there. But I think it's more common today in a handgun. And again, I think it's a niche handgun. What are the niches? I think it's a really good niche, but one that I don't actually really have right now. If you want a really lightweight gun with lightweight ammo, for a couple of things I could think of for this. If you are a backpacker, if you are a backcountry mountain biker, and you spend a lot of miles away from a lot of infrastructure, and ounces equal pounds and pounds equal pain. I was just rucking this evening. Gotta stay ready for the apocalypse. What was rule number one's cardio, right? But if you're trying to pack a lot of ammo, the 5.7's got a really, really good power to weight ratio. And the only ones really better that I can think of are the 22 long rifle and the 22 WHMR. However, those are rimfire, and they suffer the common foibles of rimfires. They're just less inherently reliable. The 5.7 handgun, if you've seen, a box of 55.7 rounds, it's a lot smaller and lighter than a box of 59mm rounds. And it's still, if you get a good reliable handgun and good reliable ammo, it's going to be about as reliable as any other good semi-automatic handgun. So that's a real big niche to me. I do spend time in the backcountry, but I live in areas with, a lot of different things. Still consider the number one threat people behaving badly, but I live in a state with both kinds of bear, brown and black, not to mention wolves, not to mention mountain lions, not to mention moose. 5.7 is not really what I want for that. But in a lot of areas, let's say you're going to spend time in the backcountry on our less than peaceful southern border, and a handgun's what you have, and you want a little bit of ammo, having a handgun with a 20-something round magazine, a couple of spare magazines, and a spare box or two of ammo, that's a lot of ammo, again, ounces equal pounds and pounds equal pain. So that's a big niche there. If you're like doing the ultralight backpacking thing and you want an ultralight handgun with a decent amount of firepower, that's a pretty good system there. That's a big niche I could think of. Another one would be an ultralight bug out bag. If you wanted to, that whole philosophy of I want my long gun and my handgun of choice to eat the same diet. You could get a 5.7 handgun and a 5.7 P.D.W. A short handy one too, because again, they don't suffer from the bleeding as much off of velocity from chopping the barrel down. It still suffers some, but not as much. So you want a short, handy, lightweight P.D.W. to throw in your bug out bag or in your truck as your truck gun. You live in an urban people hive east of the Mississippi River where just people everywhere. And you might have to bug out a long way on foot to get out of the people hive, 500 miles. On the Lamborghinis, on the leather personnel carriers. And again, you got to carry that ammo. That combo, that starts looking pretty juicy. So you get your small, lightweight P.D.W. that can be concealed easily and lightweight in your bag. A P90, a PS90 doesn't weigh a whole lot. One of the intriguing things about them. Or one of the AR uppers, assuming they're reliable. I don't have much experience with the AR uppers in 5.7. It is cool that they use the magazine well as an ejection port. That's pretty neat. But something lightweight like that, CMMG Banshee, radial delayed blowback system I think is pretty cool. But something light and handy like that paired with a 5.7 handgun. And you could easily carry as much as a 22 long rifle, but you could carry 500 rounds and still have all your other apocalypse loadout. So that intrigues me. It's not a 5.56. It's not a 300 blackout. Not nearly as powerful, but it has a really good power to weight ratio. And the world of firearms is a lot about compromises, right? Are you talking about a personal protection handgun? Do you want a lot of power or do you want lightweight and shootability? You talk about a hunting rifle. Do you want low recoil or do you want a big heavy hitting round? Talk about handguns. Do you want a pleasant shooting handgun or do you want a super concealable handgun? Because those are usually mutually exclusive. Or at least they spread apart on different parts of a Venn diagram. So a lot of things in the gun world are compromises. But if you want lightweight power to weight ratio, if that's your thing, I'm not saying this is ballistically as effective as a 9mm or a 223 or a lot of other cartridges. But again, it's lightweight, it's tiny. And it can have some pretty decent bullet construction. We just saw a Spear Gold Dots and Hornady Critical Defense. And we saw that it's not crazy expensive. Now it's about double what 9mm is. But it's not crazy. It's not, over $1 a round. Some other things to consider. It is kind of a niche round. You go to a big box store, your Cabela's, your Sportsman's Warehouse, you're probably going to find 5.7. You go to smaller stores, you're rolling the dice. So there is that to consider. A couple of other benefits. It's fairly flat shooting. Again, we go back to like that southern border, southwest kind of area. Flat shooting, if you find yourself, hopefully never, but if you find yourself on the wrong end of a handgun rifle fight, that flatter trajectory is nothing to sneeze at. Not dealing with a lot of energy on target, but at least getting some rounds on target at distance if you're a good, if you are a good, accomplished handgun shooter, that's nice. Generally, they have pretty high capacity for a handgun. That's nice. And if you're dealing with a full-size handgun, which a lot of these are, even though they're light, they generally have pretty manageable recoil. So that's kind of nice. You're not dealing, again, with a lot of power, but the ability to get quick follow-up hits on target. That's a thing. You're somebody that's really recoil sensitive. Even if those other caveats don't apply, that one might. So those are my thoughts on the 5.7 philosophy and the cartridge in general. I hope that you enjoyed this. I'm going to redo the schedule and schedule this to come out on 5.7. thank you especially to the patrons for this suggestion and for supporting the show. If you want to become a patron, if you don't just want to be a couch potato consumer of content and want to actually support the show, step up and support. Now, if this is your first episode, don't worry about it. But if you're a regular listener to this show, consider becoming a patron. There should be a Patreon link in the show notes. Patrons get a lot of cool stuff, cool insider chat where we talk about all kinds of stuff, more important stuff than this. Almighty God, the Bible, general life stuff, and we also talk a lot about guns and ballistics, as you might imagine. A group of like-minded men, iron sharpening iron, helping each other out, and that's fantastic. Sometimes we get some disagreements, ruffles and feathers, but it's a good group to be a part of, and I'm blessed to be a part of it. So I put out a lot of Patreon-only insider content on there. Just did 2 episodes today because they were requests, and I really didn't want to do them for the general public, but I did one on practical tactical fashion. Yes, I got asked about fashion advice. And I did one on tactical practical fashion and tactical practical footwear. Anyway, just a small inkling of what's on Patreon. Again, you want to become a patron, check out the link. There's some stuff on there you can check out without even spending any money. It's just on the Patreon page. A lot of the stuff's only for paid members. But go there if you want. Click the link. See what happens. Maybe you like it. With that, your tactical tip of the day. Tactical tips of the day are going to be on fishing. Yes, fishing. Nothing to do with the 5.7. But I was fishing out in the backcountry earlier today. A couple of tips. And I love fishing for sport too, just for fun. A lot of times I throw fish back. Now this is not for if you're going to throw the fish back. Throw the fish back, if it gets off, no big deal. You're going to throw it back anyway. But grabbing it, if it's like a bass, grabbing it by the lip, holding it up, taking the hook out, throwing it back, all good. If you're doing it for food, drag that fish up on the land and get a hold of it. Because pretty depressing when you're counting on that for food and it flops back in the water when you're trying to grab it. Drag it well up on land if you can. And another one, you don't need these stringers. You can make your own stringer out of 550 cord or whatever to keep a fish on, unless you're in Florida, in which case something might eat it. I've been there. But you can make a stringer if you want, but you don't really have to. Another thing you can do is find a small straight stick, shove it into the fish's mouth through the gills, and then shove it into the ground. So it has just enough water to keep water moving over its gills. If you want to keep it fresh, you're catching, hopefully by God's grace, several fish, and you keep them fresh until you're ready to kill them and cook them. Make sure the stick's big enough, make sure you shove it in far enough, but like a willow branch, a fairly straight branch, something like that. You don't need a fancy stringer. Just shove it through the fish's mouth, through the gill, and into the ground. Sandy, muddy type soil. Shove it in there enough so you know that size fish is not going to get off of that stick. Anyway, good tactical tips of the day. Your tactical verse of the day. There is proper and improper times to use force and use deadly force. There's a lot that goes into that, and that's laid out in the Bible. You should read it. God's instruction manual for our life. Just a snippet. You shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. With that, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.